Today we are fortunate to have a friend to all of us, a friend of many, Cyrus Cassells. Cyrus is the author of currently Is There Room for Another Horse in Your Horse Ranch? Which is a finalist for the National Poetry Series. He has 9 books of poetry. He's won the Pushcart Award, Lannan Foundation Award, Rockefeller Foundation, NEA Foundation. He has won the Deal Translation Award twice. He's a Poet Laureate Fellow of the American Academy of Poets. And as far as the state of Texas goes, he was our Texas Poet Laureate. Cyrus, welcome. Tell us, how are you and what are you up to?
I am doing well. Excited about the advent of spring, the warm weather. I'm actually in Mexico City working on a project related to Frida Kahlo, the great painter. And I just got through being the guest editor of Poem a Day for the Academy of American Poets. And my 22 selections start on Monday, the 1st of April. So it's been a busy time for me.
Oh, good. Well, I'm glad you were able to make some time for public poetry. We're glad you're here.
Thank
Uh,
you.
Good. Shall we get to the questions?
Oh, sure. The questions are great. I love the
Okay, good.
questions.
What's your favorite place to read a poem?
In the woods, under an avuncular tree. I like the feeling like I'm sheltered when I'm reading.
Any particular woods or just?
No, I just realized I always see trees when I think about my sanctuary reading place. Yeah.
Well, speaking of poem, what was the first poem you remember getting? Like you really, I get it.
What came to me was Morning Song, which is the opening poem of Sylvia Plath's Ariel about the birth of her child. And the first line, love set you going like a fat gold watch, sort of tickled me to no end. I thought, oh, before then I wasn't interested in poetry much at all, but reading Ariel was a huge turning point in my
What did
reading.
you,
And
what were you interested in?
I've always wanted to be a novelist, and the funny thing is I finally finished the first novel at age ...
Okay.
As a senior citizen, I finally finished the first novel and almost the second
I
novel.
promised no surprise questions. I'll let that go. Okay, speaking of questions, if you could ask any question to a past writer or artist, who would that artist person be and what would you ask them?
To my surprise, that artist is Eduardo Galeano, the Uruguayan novelist. He did a trilogy called Memory of Fire. And my question would be was how did he condense so much significant history into such short, vivid vignettes? So the 3 books cover all sorts of Latin American and even North American history. And I thought, well, how did he do that? And it's lyrical and eccentric, but I think just, I don't know, all of the vignettes go down beautifully for me. So that was my, oh, I think I'd like to know how he did that.
Great question. Interesting. Okay. Uh, Let me ask a harder question. What do you think contemporary writing and art gets right, and what do you think it misses?
In terms of what it gets right, what came to me was intimacy, trauma, family psychology, and wounding. I think we have good perceptive literature related to those themes. In terms of what it misses, It's so opinionated. Beauty, musicality, and concision. I need more beauty. I need dynamic language, and so often I don't get that, whether it's poetry or prose. Concision, I like homeopathic writers. I'm going to go
Could
on
you help us what a homeopathic writer would be?
in the sense of that their work is incredibly concise and every single word matters. I'm thinking of Morrison, Toni Morrison, who is my favorite writer, contemporary writer, and how much there is in The Bluest Eye, Sula, and even Beloved. The book, excuse me, the books are only about 250 pages. How much depth and psychology she's able to get into. To me, it's more like poetry that way, in terms of concentrated language. I just read way too much stuff that feels sort of superfluous to me, both in poems and prose. So concision there, and I like to say homeopathic, where a little bit goes a long way. Or it's like those little paper flowers, you put them in water and they expand. That's the kind of attention and artistry that I appreciate there.
Okay, if you had to divest yourself of your library down to what would fit in a cardboard box, what's fitting in your cardboard box?
Well, I just mentioned Toni Morrison, so Beloved, Bluest Eye, Jazz, and Sula. I'm a huge fan of Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient. It was almost my privilege to be cast in the movie version of the film. I was so excited by like my favorite novel. And then because of practical delays, I wasn't able to take my part in the movie, which would have been as Colin Firth's chauffeur. Um, Mariette and Ecstasy by Ron Hansen, which is a historical novel set in upstate New York in the early 20th century about a postulant who has the stigmata. That has some of the most beautiful writing I've ever found in it. And it's also, I don't think it's more than 144 pages. Love as I Lay Dying by William Faulkner. I've never gotten over my mother as a fish, that one chapter with Varnum in that one line. That just thrilled me so much. Maybe that was my first clue that I was going to become a poet and not a novelist. Collected Stories of Isaac Babel or Babel. Always loved those stories. Red Calvary and all that. Hard Labor by Cesare Pavese is one of my favorite books of poetry. And is the book that's maybe most inspiring my writing now. I'm working on a new book of poems that it's has to do with a lot to do with fascist Italy. Italy of Mussolini period. Selected poems of Rainer Maria Rilke, one of my favorite poets. The Duino Elegies is just, it's not the Bible, but is like a Bible for me. Master and Margarita. I don't know anyone who doesn't like that wild, crazy novel about the devil coming to Moscow with a big giant cat. Uh, those are the books that came to mind. Um, my little box for now.
Let me ask a bigger, more general question. What makes something art?
Oh,
Just anything. What makes anything art as opposed to?
that was a tough. I said, what did I say here? A meeting of emotion, craftsmanship, and heartfelt intention. A little bit of abstract, but it's just to define artists. So I don't know. It's pretty amorphous. It's just so much.
Well,
And
you
I hate this idea that someone can come along and say something isn't art in a way that feels so dismissive and reductive. Like, oh my, my 5-year-old could have done that. I mean, they usually talk about that in terms of visual art, but or that something is bad without, or it's not really, or it's bad because without any real examples or what their criteria are. So for me, emotion is key. I tend not to be very responsive to art that does have some elements of emotion. Like I used to work for a painter who did a lot of sort of geometric art. And I found that I wasn't very, I was responsive to him as a person. I had to handle his correspondence because he had macular degeneracy, but he was corresponding with, Helen Frankenthaler and Norma Mailer. So, but his actual art felt sort of, I don't know, clinical to me. But some elements of emotion are important for me. Um, Craftsmanship, that's pretty subjective. Intention, I think, for me is a lot of it. In terms of Aristotelian notions of art, where, whatever it is has to be framed in a particular way, I tend to question that or resist that.
You're not a big fan of the golden mean?
No, I think people get locked into a lot of expectations and manipulation about what they're supposed to feel. I mean, I was laughing with students about the fact that when I do watch television, um, all of the scenes have song lyrics that tell you exactly what's happening to the characters in the scene instead of trusting you. I call it the Grey's Anatomy, school, musical school, where, the song is spelling out all the emotions. And I find that the European productions and productions from other parts of the world all imitate that. Like the song, it's often in English, will tell you exactly what's going on in the scene. And to me, it's as bad as canned laughter. It's like, no, 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 don't tell me how to feel in terms of what I'm watching. But they just won't leave the audience alone. They're like, okay.
You're a film critic as well. That goes the same for films? That you want emotion when you look at a film, do those qualify
You're
that way?
breaking up a little bit.
Okay. Well, you look at a
I
lot
don't-
of film.
you need to repeat. Okay,
Okay.
you need to repeat the question because you're breaking up sound-wise.
Okay. As a film critic, you see a lot of films. Does the same
Mhm.
thing work for films?
I didn't hear half of your sentence, actually.
Okay.
All I heard was as a film critic.
Okay. You see a lot of films. Do you follow the same guidelines for films as what makes a film art?
I guess I don't worry about the question. I try and experience the movie. The problem these days is that so much of film criticism is consumer criticism, which I also resist. To sort of rate the movie and sort of label it, to say should you see it or should you not see it, which I object to quite a bit. And there's a lot of um, people saying, "Oh, I guess I won't see the movie now," based on something people say on Facebook or X or whatever. And I think people need to experience art directly and just without other people telling them again what they're supposed to think or feel. But there's a lot of it going on, like, oh, well, I guess I won't see that, right? And often when people do that, I make a point of going to see it myself and not being told, or I'm curious about other film critics' responses, but I've learned to try and stop reading them so much before I see the movie. Like I read a review of The Whale that I felt like was, once I saw the movie, was a hysterical response to that movie, which I found quite powerful and very emotional and very strong in terms of the acting and the whole ensemble. I mean, it won an Oscar for Brendan Fraser, not surprisingly, but things like that where people are, again, trying to tell you what you're supposed to think or feel about the work in ways that are a little bit insidious somehow. or they just, they're anti something and they're venting about movies. Like someone I respect did a little vent about The Zone of Interest, and I think it's quite a remarkable movie. I mean, it doesn't meet my usual requirement of emotion, but it's unsettling and brilliant, and I would watch it again to think about how it was made and done. But to publicly say that it was bad, and also played in a lot of bad faith politics about the people who wanted to attack him for his Oscar speech, things like that. So I tend to resist heavy duty definitions of art, and I don't think they're really so helpful for people. There's a lot of experimental work that I think it's it's important to just experience it and go, okay, hmm. A lot of times people like things and I go and see them and I don't like them and I question them, but if people are really loving things, I think it's important if you didn't quote get it to maybe look at it again and think about why people are responsive to particular things, right? Rather
Yeah,
than
I think
just say,
that's
well,
a lot of art. Anything is, if you don't get it, doesn't necessarily mean it isn't good. It just may mean you need to look harder.
yeah, just be patient and understand that it takes time for us to absorb art, especially innovative art. The things that people are so quick to dismiss in this consumer environment. I'm thinking about something like McCabe and Mrs. Miller, where the soundtrack and the sound was so unusual and challenging for people. And now we consider it like, I think it's perhaps the most poetic of all American movies, right? But thankfully we had Paul and Kill, like a person to come and champion the film and say, wait a second, this is quite an unusual work of art. And why don't you give it, give it another look or try or whatever there. So I try and be very careful. I mean, I'm still doing criticism. I'm not writing for the Washington Spectator, but I just think it's interesting how people are how they advocate for certain works of art and movies. And sometimes I think their responses are like my friend's response to Zone of Interest feels sort of hysterical and like, adversarial. I don't think that's necessary. To me, they embarrass themselves by their responses. Like,
Okay.
okay, like people had some pretty hysterical responses to The Power of the Dog, which is a very prickly movie. I can't say I liked it, but I think it's brilliant, right? So what is art? I'll leave it to history, I guess, as part of my
Okay, I
response.
have one more question for you. If you could read, what poem would you read to your father, and will you read it for us?
I will. My father grew up in Detroit, so it seemed perfect to choose a poem by Phil Levine, who's a very Detroit based. I don't know if he was born in Detroit. A poem that captures, I think, the sort of working class world of Detroit that my father grew up in. It's one of my all-time favorite poems. It's called They Feed They Lion by Phil Levine. Out of burlap sacks, out of bearing butter, out of black bean and wet slate bread, out of the acids of rage, the candor of tar, out of creosote, gasoline, drive shafts, wooden dollies, they lie and grow. Out of the gray hills of industrial barns, out of rain, out of bus ride, West Virginia to kiss my ass, out of buried aunties, mothers hardening like pounded stumps, out of stumps, out of the bones need to sharpen and the muscles to stretch. They lie and grow. Earth is eating trees, fence posts, gutted cars. Earth is calling in her little ones. Come home from pig balls, from the ferocity of pig driven to holiness, from the furred ear and the full jowl come, the repose of the hung belly, from the purpose they lie and grow, from the sweet glues of the trotters, come the sweet kinks of the fist, from the full flower of the hams and the thorax of caves, from bow down, come rise up, come they lion from the reeds of shovels, the grained arm that pulls the hands, they lie and grow from my 5 arms and all my hands, from all my white sins forgiven, they feed, from my car passing under the stars, they lie in, from my children inherit, from the oak turned to a wall, they lie in, from thy sack and thy belly opened, and all that was hidden burning on the oil-stained earth, they feed they lion, and he comes.
Thank you, Cyrus. That was wonderful. Thank you for the interview.
You're
Look
very
forward,
welcome.
look forward to seeing you soon.